Welcome back to Ride JBI. I'm JB, and today I'm with my coworker Anthony, and we're going to give you a detailed update on this Ducati Desmo450 that we have been busy working on and riding on for almost 2.5, maybe 3 months now.
Yeah, I would say closer to 2.5 months. I would say rode it stock form for a little bit. Most of that time was in stock form, and then I'd say about the past month or so, we rode it in JBI spec form. So it was really cool to see the compare and contrast between stock versus our JBI spec form, which we will be offering to you guys very shortly.
Yeah, so in this video, we're going to break down so far what we've ridden, what we've done, what we've experienced, and what we plan to do next on this bike. All right, so far, as Anthony pointed out, we spent a little more than a month just riding this bike in stock form at pretty much all the different tracks that Southern California has to offer. And then even the same track as well, just on different days. What we wanted to do is get a good overall impression of the bike in different terrains and in different conditions as well before we went ahead and made any adjustments. We kept the stock suspension on there. By that, I mean the stock spring rates. They weren't quite ideal for us at the time in terms of getting sag, but we just wanted to get a feel for the bike pretty much right out of the crate for it. So with that in mind, I'll let Anthony give you more of a ride impression because he's spent much more time on the bike than I have myself. And I'll give you some more technical feedback in terms of what we did on the suspension, what we've experienced so far, and what we'll be focusing on next. So Anthony, please give him just an overall impression of what you felt the bike did while stock, what it kind of minorly stood out that we wanted to improve upon, and what majorly stood out that we wanted to improve upon on the suspension.
So in stock form, the Desmo450 does a really good job as far as being balanced. I would say it doesn't do anything poorly or anything overly positive as far as the suspension front. It's a good overall package to start from. You have 5.0 Newton fork springs up front, a 46 Newton shock spring out back. I feel like the balance is pretty okay with that, but you can drop rear spring rate to maybe match the weight of the rider a little bit better. That's what we did after a few simple rides. So we dropped that from a 46 Newton to a 44 Newton. And I felt like the bike, instead of having the stink bug feel, kind of leveled out a little bit. And it had a better characteristic feel over to those small to medium bumps. So after we did that, we went ahead and revalved it. We went to 4.8 Newton fork springs, which kind of matches my weights a little bit better. And then we kept that 44 Newton shock spring out back, as it again matches my weight. But then we installed all of our JBI hard parts and Motocross spec valving into the front forks and the rear shock. Right away, we had a better overall feel of the suspension, that being like the characteristics of how it hits small to medium bumps, how it has good holdup, and then the bottom resistance did still lack a little bit, but we weren't too worried. So again, we had that really good flavor and characteristic, but we just needed more of that. Our second time around, we went ahead and went back up to the 5.0 Newton fork springs, beefed up the valving, and I do feel like not only did the ride height get better, because when we dropped down to the 4.8s, kind of brought back that stink bug feel a little bit. So we went back to the 5.0s, got the ride height that we wanted, but we also increased the valving to make it stiffer. But for the front forks particularly, we're actually kind of surprised how stiff we can go on the valving and have it still maintain a plush and comfortable feel over those small to medium bumps, because as you guys know, the stiffer you go, the more you're going to feel those bumps. We went stiffer, and right away it was apparent to me that this was the correct direction to go in. Both myself and JB hopped on the bike after our first iteration and we're like, hey, we can go a little bit stiffer. So we did that with round 2. And after round 2, we were like, man, this is another step in the right direction, but we want to go a little bit more. And that led into what you guys are seeing today, which is iteration 3. That's how this bike currently sits. And we have one ride on it at Lake Elsinore Raceway, not Lake Elsinore Motorsports Park. A little bit different, same location, but under new management, new dirt, new layout, which you guys will see very shortly and in this video. But then again, iteration 3, it was like, wow. I was super surprised at how much stiffer it was with just some slight valving changes in the mid-valve section of the fork. And Lake Elsinore Raceway has some huge jumps. I didn't even jump all of the jumps because I was, to be honest, a little bit scared. A lot of the jumps in the back are pretty lippy as far as the lips and landing, so you have to be pretty precise. I did test out the suspension by casing this triple step up numerous times in a row, and I didn't get bucked off at all. I felt totally in control and comfortable doing so. But the rest of the track, the small to medium bumps, as we talked about earlier, the stiffer you go, the more unpleasant the feeling that's going to be. And I feel like even with updating that mid-valve compression side of the fork, we didn't really lose that plush and comfortable character that we've become used to and known for through our suspension services and DIY kits. So overall, as this bike sits, I'm extremely happy. I've owned other 450s in the past and haven't been able to ride them to my full potential, as I'm having a hard time hanging on to the bike and just really having an understanding of the motorcycle. But with the Ducati, granted, it is an all new platform, and JB is really familiar with tuning the Showa 49 millimeter twin chamber spring fork. But we've learned a lot, not only testing this specific bike, but a lot of what we've learned with this Showa fork on the Desmo 450 is actually translated to the Honda CRF models, the Kawasaki KX models, and the Suzuki RMZ models. So I'm really excited. Again, this is only our third attempt on the forks. And now that we have got the forks in a spot that we are really comfortable and happy with, we're going to shift our attention to the Showa monoshock on this Desmo 450. I will let JB kind of carry on with his technical breakdown and analysis of the bike, and we will go from there.
Yeah, so with the front forks, we've been focusing on that primarily. That's just the area we felt like there was still a lot of potential for us to gain in that spot. And we don't want to change too many things at once when it comes to modifying a bike. So after we did our first Revalve, again, we were pretty happy with it right out the gate. It was definitely better than stock, but we definitely knew there was a lot more potential in the bike still, especially compared to the other brand bikes that have similar Showa suspension components. So based on our first spec that we were riding on, we knew pretty quickly that we still needed to focus on the forks before we could work on the shock. As Anthony went into detail, we did work on the forks a couple times with some different spring rates, some different valving. And now we're at a spot where we're feeling very pleased with the setup we do have in the forks. By no means do I think it's going to be our final spec, but I feel like we're 90% there now for it. So with that, we're going to reshift our focus back to the shock. We've been pretty happy with the first shock spec that we did create, but we do know, again, there's going to be some more potential in there, and we don't know unless we try. So I'm really excited now that we can focus on the shock more, since we're very pleased with the forks. In stock form, we felt like this bike rode pretty dang comfortable. It wasn't as plush as it could be, but it was, for a stock bike, good enough. But it didn't have the amount of hold up that we'd hope we could have out of the suspension for it. So that was like the main area we were really working on with this bike, was giving it some good hold up and good bottoming resistance for that. So that's something we've really nailed down with the forks now. What we're learning is how compliant and comfortable this chassis is. The reason I say that, and we've been able to come to that conclusion, is other brand bikes that have similar Showa forks, the setting I put in there is going to be unique per that bike. So the Honda Showa setting I have is unique to the Hondas. The Kawasaki setting I have is unique to the Kawas. Now they're pretty dang similar overall, but there's always going to be some uniquenesses to them, because how that fork feels on that bike is going to be heavily influenced based upon the chassis that it is mated to. And so far on this fork, this is one of the stiffest Showa fork settings that we are building for these off-road dirt bikes. So what that's telling us is how compliant and comfortable that this chassis is, and how much it's allowing us to go firm on the fork settings without it actually feeling firm and not comfortable. With the rear shock, I'm pretty excited just to tune it some more, because again, I feel like right out the gate we've got some good specs. For context, Anthony and I both sit around 150 to 160 pounds. So we can use the stock 46 Newton spring. We just don't have much preload on it. So we prefer the 44 Newton spring with about 7 to 9 millimeters of spring preload on it. So kind of right in the meat of where we want to be on spring preload. And that is yielding us a rider sag around 105 to 107. We're finding that range to work really well in terms of keeping this bike balanced. And again, by that, I mean how the bike sits when you're riding. The rear is not riding too high, and it's not riding too low. So this will also vary a little bit depending on your overall stature. For some of you taller guys, let's say 6'1" and above, you might prefer a range of 103 to 105. One thing that we are starting to learn pretty quickly now are spring rates and what rider weight they're going to match with. Thankfully to you guys, a lot of you guys have been emailing us and sharing your own feedback, especially what springs you've been using with how much preload. So we're saving all that information down and starting to get a really clear idea on, again, what springs match to what rider weight, and also how we can match that up with the fork springs as well. So what we're going to focus on next is, right now we actually have this shock pretty soft in terms of the clickers. We have the low speed almost all the way backed out and the high speed almost all the way backed out. So what that tells you is JB went pretty dang stiff with our first valving spec on this Ducati. And that's wasn't on purpose. It's just based on what I saw inside and what we thought is what I thought needed to be done. So as it sits now with the clickers backed out almost all the way, it rides really well, but that tells me that that's not quite the ideal internal spec if we have to set up the shock that way via the clickers. So we're actually going to take it back apart, make some minor adjustments to the valving. I'm actually going to soften it up just a little bit overall. That allows us to get back more into the middle of the clicker range, have some good adjustability with it. And I think that's going to bring back more comfort that we're looking for out of the shock without really losing much bottoming resistance on that. So that's gonna be our next step that we touch on. And I imagine we're probably gonna do another 2, maybe 3 shock revalves. And just because, again, we don't know unless we try. So we really want to try a bunch of different settings, get a very good clear idea on how this bike responds to that. And then I think after we do some more work on the shock, that'll allow us to have a better impression on the forks as well, because as we improve one end, it becomes easier to focus on the other end that may not be performing at the same level. So I'm excited how this bike's coming along. It's quickly becoming one of my favorite bikes to ride. And
Right, you said you were going to buy one.
I did, yeah. So I imagine probably like within another month or so, we're going to have our finalized JBI specs for this Ducati Desmo. We're not in a rush. I appreciate you guys waiting on us. I know there's some other companies out there already selling settings, and good on them, but we're just very confident in our testing process. And we'd rather tell people no, because we don't want to give you a setting now, then call you back in a month and say, hey, we got a better setting, please send it back in. We'd rather wait that extra month in time. So that way, when you do send in your stuff to us, we're very confident in what we're providing you with as the rider.
And to kind of elaborate what JB just touched on is not only will this be available as a JBI Revalve service, so that means you bring your forks and shock or ship your forks and shock to Ride JBI HQ. This will also be a JBI Spec DIY kit, pretty similar to what you see from us on the JBI Spec Kawasaki KXF models, that being like the 25, 26, KX250 and the 2024 and up KX450. Sorry. So yeah, again, this will be available as a JBI Spec DIY kit and Revalve service. We also have custom stickers coming out. Those will drop right around the time those DIY kits and Revalve services become available. But yeah, as JB elaborated to, is really cool and unique to see how we've learned in just a short amount of time, about a month or so, just tuning and riding this bike.
Yeah, thanks you guys for waiting on us. And we will have some more feedback from some other riders as well. That's another area that we really pride ourselves on, is working with a good sample range of riders of different heights, different weights, and different rider abilities, because that gives us very clear insights to how well the overall setting works. Again, that doesn't mean that one setting is going to be perfect for everybody, but if we can have 10 people ride this bike and 8 out of 10 go, I like that bike, I can ride it, and it only needs some minor tweaks, and that tells us we have an overall good setting. Whereas if 5 out of 10 were kind of split on opinion, then that would tell us overall the setting is lacking and still could be improved overall. So we'll keep you guys up to date as this keeps materializing. And I'm excited to do some more work on this thing and try to cram what we've learned in the past 20 years of revalving all the other brand bikes into 2.5 months and see how quickly we can get this thing to catch up and compete with the Japanese and Austrian bikes that we've been tuning for 20 years now.
Yep. Peace.